I'm Kunal Chandiramani, the entrepreneur in residence at the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Cal State Long Beach. I'm alongside Rex Wong, an inspirational entrepreneur. Co-founded Hollow.ai, runs an accelerator out of Santa Monica, was the founding investor for Applied Semantics, the company that invented AdSense and eventually got acquired by Google. And yeah, I think anything I say beyond this point is an understatement to the level of what you guys did with even Applied Semantics, inventing pretty much the base of today's advertising.
Yeah, it was an interesting ride. And that was way back in the late 90s, so I'm dating myself. But it was interesting. It's actually, and we sold that to Google 21 years ago last week, I think. So it was interesting.
That is crazy. And so you've been through so many ventures as a serial entrepreneur. What's your journey been like?
Well, I started off, my family was pretty entrepreneurial. My dad came here with nothing, kind of was a handyman while also being a waiter. That helped him start a construction company, and then he became the largest Asian contractor in the Bay Area where I'm from. And kind of met my mom in the restaurant, but my mom was an artist who studied under the Picasso of China. But when she came here, as with all artists, you had no money. And but they kind of figured their way and kind of made a life. And then for us kids, we kind of grew up never needing anything and but also seeing that entrepreneurial spirit. And so that bug bit me. And the weird thing is I got into being an entrepreneur at 13 years. I started my first company when I was 13 because I didn't want to work for my dad because he made me. And in hindsight, I learned how to type, I learned how to use a word processor, and I learned how to run a spreadsheet. And this is in the early 80s, and I was like 13. So, in hindsight, my dad taught me a lot, but at the time I hated it. So I said, I don't want to work for my dad. My dad's a slave driver. And so that's how I became an entrepreneur. And the first company that I started was, I learned kind of arbitrage, right? And arbitrage can be, definitely information is one of the keys. And so when I was 13, and this is like 1985, right? So my dad was like the president of a bunch of like chamber of commerces and associations. So he had a lot of business friends. And I had this thing for stationery. And before that, when I was a little kid, in grade school, I used to buy big packets of gummy bears or like gummy worms, break them up into Ziploc bags and sell them to my friends. So that was my first introduction to arbitrage. And so in 1985, there were companies like Price Club. And this is pre Costco, okay? So Price Club was a company that came out, and then in the office space, Office Club. And it was this idea that, it's a club, it's a membership. And I used to love stationery because I used to raid my dad's office supplies because I like paper clips and, pens and stuff like that. And so I was enamored by stationery. And in the day, in the 80s, you used to buy stationery from the corner stationery store. And they used to have huge catalogs that you would buy stationery from. And so I was like enamored by that, right? And then I realized when I went to this Office Club, I said, wow, paper clips are $5 at the corner store, but you can buy 5 for $5 at Office Club. And I'm going like, wow. And then I started looking at the catalog, comparing prices and saying, wow, it's like 5 times more money at the stationery store. I just had to buy them in bulk, right? So I ended up doing that, breaking it up, and then all my dad's friends, I used to steal the catalogs from the stationery stores, give it out to all my dad's friends and say, okay, this is what you do. Look through this book, write down what you need. Here's a form. And in the day, it was a fax machine. Fax it to me by Friday. And then my mom and I would go to Office Club and Price Club, go pick up everything and start delivering it the next week. And I made like 50 grand, when I was 13. I was going like, man, this is great. And so that was really my first real taste of business and arbitrage. And that's kind of, it's just information. It's like, well, a lot of people didn't know what Price Club was at the time. This was new, right? and people aren't so fascinated about paper clips, but I was, right? And for most people, it's like, oh, well, we have a budget for office supplies. You're a businessman. That's not what you think about, right? So, oh yeah, okay, let's do it. And it became a business, and that was great. And I used some of that money because I really wanted my own computer. And in those days, there was IBM, and then starting to be these clone compatibles that you would build. And so I went to the computer store, but I made a deal with them. I said, hey, I want to buy a computer from you, but you have to teach me how to build it. And so I built my first computer that I owned myself. And I said, wow, this is cool. It's pretty easy, right? And then, I had this computer, and then my dad would brag to his friends like, oh, look at my son. He built this computer. He's like a whiz kid. And I'm going like, wow, this is cool. And they said, wait, and it's half the price of IBM. And so all my dad's friends would say, wow, that's half the price. Can you build that for me? I need a computer. And so I sold that computer, made double the profit, ended up buying a bigger computer, then selling that one, and then ended up starting to sell 2 computers, 5 computers, 10 computers, and all of a sudden that was a business. And then I had to go back to school, and so my mom said, hey, why don't you partner with your uncle? Your uncle just, he was an employee at this company that went public. He's got some money, and he's an engineer. He went to UC Berkeley as a double E. Why don't you guys partner, right? And so he ended up running the business. I ended up running operations, and I was the one who made all the ads, and we started advertising. And by the time I graduated high school, we had 4 computer stores in the Bay Area. And this is like in the late 80s, right? And then I went to college at UC Davis, but I wasn't that enamored by college because I was already making like good amount of money. And I came down to LA, and I said, oh, LA is cool. Let's start some more computer stores. So I ended up starting more computer stores down here. And so through the 90s, I had computer stores, and then we ended up advertising that in this big magazine called Computer Shopper. And then locally, there were these magazines called Micro Times and Computer Currents, which are all disappeared now. But so those were like, you had news racks, and we were the biggest advertiser. And then LA Times, I took out full pages in the sports section, right? And then I ended up building a huge computer store in Glendale, which was about 23,000 square feet, right across from the Galleria. And I was still like 22 or something like that. And we were doing good. And yeah, that's how, that was my first part of my entrepreneurial journey. And then these people would come in. And this girl, I remember her name was Cherry, just because the name was so unique. And then she came in, and she'd start buying 1 computer, then 2 computers, then 4 computers, then it was 10 computers a week, and then 20 computers. And after a while, I said, like, this is like in 1995. I'm going like, what do you guys do? Like, you guys are buying computers like mad. And going like, oh yeah, we're an internet service provider. We're Earthlink. I'm going like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And so I looked at it and said, and by 1996, I started an ISP, and I was giving it away with computers, right? So essentially, I'd sell you a computer and say, oh, it comes with internet service, right? And then in 97, my AMD rep came, and he's selling me AMD chips, right? And he said, hey, my brother is doing this startup, and you could meet him. He and his buddy, they're from Caltech, right? And so he drew out on a paper napkin basically a search engine called Oingo, and this was the start of Applied Semantics, which was Oingo, right? And it was a meaning-based search engine. So we figured out the context of matching words and things that surround the word would create contextual relevance. It isn't ironically different than what ChatGPT is doing now, which is natural language processing. It's just that in the day, and we had 2 lexicology professors from UCLA, and in the day, our contextual algorithm was 2 million words. And today, GPT 4.0 is 1 trillion documents, which on average document contains 1,000 words. So it's 1 quadrillion words. And that's not, it's only really the relativity of compute power. because computing power has doubled every year and a half if it's Moore's law, and that's compounded over the last 25, 26 years to the point now where you're processing 1 quadrillion words. But we had a system that was 2 million words, and that was the basis of our contextual search engine, and it was powering Alta Vista, which was one of the original crawler search engines, and we were the directory search. So, for example, if you typed in bulls, we would ask you to filter that down and say, well, there's 11 meanings of bulls. Which one do you mean? Do you mean the cattle bulls? Do you mean the running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain? Do you mean the Chicago Bulls, which is a basketball team? Or do you mean Wall Street Bulls, right? And if you said Chicago Bulls, we'd know, okay, you don't care about Wall Street and running of the Bulls. You only care about Michael Jordan, Chicago, United Center, NBA. Just that's all we're going to give you in the search, right? And that was our contextual search engine, right? And that's what made up Applied Semantics. And during that time, we went through a boom and a bust, and the company Alta Vista got sold to Digital, which got bought by Compaq, and then Compaq, when the .bomb happened, they shut it down, and we had to pivot. And so one of the lessons I learned in the journey of being an entrepreneur is that inevitably you start with one thing, but you inevitably will pivot because things will change, right? And you need to adjust with the times, right? And we pivoted, and Yahoo came to us and said, hey, that contextual search engine, could you apply it to advertising? And so ironically, AdSense was built for Yahoo. It wasn't built for Google. And Yahoo was trying to do display ads, and they were saying like, well, okay, if you put London in your search term, I want you to give me Expedia, because probably you're looking for the city and travel. But if you put Jack in front of London, now it's an author, so give me Amazon. So that was the basis of AdSense, right? And most people don't know that was built for Yahoo. And it's one of the other things that Yahoo let slip through its hands, right? And then another company came called GoTo.com, and GoTo.com is actually the inventor of the paid placement ad on the side of a search engine. Google didn't invent that. Google made it better. Google didn't invent it. And GoTo invented it. It was a company that came out of Idea Lab out of Pasadena. And it invented these paid placement ads. And so, and its concept was that you would pay to be further to the top. So if somebody paid $1 and you wanted to be at the top of that, you'd pay $1.01. How Google innovated it was they realized that even if you paid $1.01, if nobody clicks on that ad, you don't get paid. So what they did is they came up with a quality score and said, hey, it basically comes down to the total revenue per slot. So for example, somebody pays $1, you could pay 50 or let's say 51 cents. But if twice the number of people click on the ad, you would go to the top because the total revenue is $1.02 versus $1, right? And so it was based on the revenue per spot and not the price that you paid. So that encouraged you not only to pay more, but to have a catchy title or a catchy description so that people would click, and to make sure that it was relevant. And so that's how they gamified it to make it relevant to an ad, right? But that was kind of the basis of AdSense. Right?
That is beautiful, and that's crazy. Like, that's one hell of a journey.
Yeah, and that was 21 years ago, and there's been a journey after that too. But
so, like, even now you're working on the cutting edge of AI, and like the AI revolution, the .com revolution, the internet revolution, the computer revolution. You've been through so many of these world-changing paradigm shifts. How do you navigate through those?
So what I learned, first of all, is you can't be too early and you definitely can't be too late. So catching the timing is very, very, that's the kind of art is trying to figure out, what's the right timing. Because when you're too early, I'll give you an example in social networks. Friendster was great, it was too early, right? MySpace was great, but it was still a little early, right? MySpace, and they sold out. Facebook hit the timing perfectly, right? And so timing is everything, right? Video is the same thing, and sometimes it might be timing. Other things it might be just, how your luck, how you wrote it out, right? There's a lot of factors, some that you can control and some that you can't. I always like to say that things still require luck. All you can do is make sure that you put yourself in the path of luck, because if you don't put yourself in the path, then you'll never get the luck, right? So you have to be both lucky and smart at the same time, right? But if you're not smart, you'll never hit the luck, right? So that's one thing I learned to be very important.
Plan to be lucky.
Yeah, so you have to be in the path of luck, right? If you're not even there, it's like a lottery ticket. Well, you have to buy a lottery ticket to win the lottery. Doesn't mean you're going to win the lottery, and it's there's probably 1 billion to 1 that you're going to win the lottery. But if you don't buy a ticket, you'll never even win at all, right? So but that's not the best bet. Then it's about, well, what's the odds of the luck, right? And 1 billion to 1 is not bad. It's not really great odds, right?
So, like, in all these boom bust cycles where you have the market going up, the market coming down, and like especially like I think we're in such a rapidly changing environment right now. How do you, like, when you're already building a company, how do you deal with change?
Take nothing for granted, and like I said, pivot. Be prepared to pivot, right? Don't ever believe that you're the smartest guy in the room. Don't ever believe that you know everything. And don't ever believe that, it's good now, can it be good forever, right? You always have to be prepared. And if you're prepared, then, you can deal with the obstacles on the road, because there will be obstacles, right?
I love that. So, like, when you're building your first company, we're just like, with scaling up the computer business, and what were like obstacles that really stepped in, like as a first-time founder?
The computer business started off so great, and it was one of those that I didn't try to start a computer business on purpose. It just ended up, what I tried to do was make sure that something I was interested in, my passion, right? And I believe that's very important, is that you have to follow your passion. Because if you love doing what you do, then everything will come, right? And every business I've started, I love what I do. You didn't need to pay me to do it. I would have done it. And therefore, I'm very passionate about it. And so I don't even ask, like, what am I getting paid for it? It was never a job, right? And I feel that's one of the problems of even today. It's like, well, I come from a Chinese family. Chinese families, just like a lot of, I'll call it immigrant families, try to beat into them that, you need to go to college and you need to be a lawyer, a doctor, you need to get that degree and stuff like that. In 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't think a degree was commodity. I think a degree is commodity today, right? Lots of people have degrees, right? The reality is, if you look at the facts, most people aren't even doing a job that was in their degree 5 years after they graduated, right? And so the reality is well, but they're paying off the student loans still, but they're not doing the thing, because then they realize that, well, I found my way, and I have to be happy, right? And I'm not saying that's everybody, but I'm saying that, you have to be happy and passionate about what you do, and if you can do that, it's very fulfilling then to see things go. And I think that's really what the entrepreneurial bug is. Now, your business concept has to work. So that does not mean you're a good entrepreneur. There's a lot more than just that, but I do believe that you need to have fun and you need to be passionate about what you do, right? And that if you don't have that ingredient, you shouldn't be an entrepreneur, right?
I think the fun is so important, because like as an entrepreneur, you work so hard to build something that's in your head into reality. If you're not having fun, you're not going to survive the amount of work it takes. It really, if it feels like work, you're going to assign it a box. But when it feels like fun, it building the company is it's a vicious cycle. Building the company is fun, so you spend more time building it. And it's like the 70% that is fun helps you get to the 30% that isn't fun.
Yep, definitely, yeah. And like I said, I think the problem of being an entrepreneur is that inevitably you deal with the stuff that isn't that much fun. And I'll say this, what's not fun? Fundraising is not that fun, right? And every entrepreneur has to go through it. Compliance is not that fun, and so making sure your staff is paid, making sure you follow the rules, making sure you pay all the licenses and that's not the funnest part of it, and that's a part of being an entrepreneur too, right? Doing the accounting is not fun, right? But that's also the journey, right? But I mean, the fun things are building stuff and selling stuff. I think those are the two fun parts of being an entrepreneur, right?
What about change? Like when change happens, like in your mind, like today, the market shifts and there's something brand new that's out there that you see is on your path that you can really take into the company. How does your mind work with picking that change up? Like what would you do?
Well, change is, a lot of it is, I mean, you have in your mind what product you're going to build. I always believe that businesses have to be built to be sales-centric and not engineering-centric. At the same time, the product has to be able to be built. And that's what I find is unique. I come from the Bay Area. It's kind of ironic. I come from the Bay Area, but I moved down to LA. And when we were doing Applied Semantics, we were trying to raise money for it. And we went to Sand Hill Road and we pitched all the VCs there. And you know what one VC said? He said, well, if only you were in San Francisco. If you want to move back to San Francisco, we'll fund you. But I don't want to fly an hour for a board meeting. This is like in 1997, 1998. Okay, so in that era, the mentality was, most of the VCs were in the Bay Area, and that was the center of the world. Today, you have VCs all over the world. Every city has 10, 15 VCs now, right? At least, right? And you have angel investors, you invest in angel groups and stuff like that. That was not the case 25 years ago, right? Today, it's much more everywhere, right? And even in like small cities, there's a lot of incubation programs, acceleration programs. I mean, Long Beach, we're here at an accelerator program. I mean, at this university, every university now has these type of programs, right? And so I think there's a great free spirit of entrepreneurism. But I also say that it won't all be successful in that sometimes you also need life experience. And that is probably where maybe graduating and doing 5 years of something you really don't like, so you discover what you do like and you discover the pain, that's really how you can form and shape. Because I do believe that companies come out of some type of a pain. You have to solve a problem, right? You can't find a problem, you have to solve a problem, and that's one of the things that a life experience will give you.
I love that, and that it's one of those things. Building a company is hard, but it can also be extremely rewarding if done. And it is extremely rewarding. But
of course, yeah. Especially if you can exit. It is extremely rewarding, but also a lot of entrepreneurs have to understand that. Like, for example, even if you raise your first round of funding or your first VC round of funding, that's not the end. That's the beginning, right? You take that money and you're supposed to make money for them and yourself, hopefully, right? But that isn't the exit. That's not the final. That's just the beginning. And there's a lot more hoops to jump through to make it work, right? But if you can get through all those hoops, and an average company in the U.S. right now takes 4.4 rounds of financing to exit, right? So you need to go through those hoops 4 times, at least, right? So I mean that's a journey, and I think the statistic is 81% of companies fail before the second round. So only 19% of companies get through past the second round of financing, right? So your odds are incredibly great just to get through those first 2 rounds. Now that doesn't mean you die. That doesn't mean that 81% of the companies die, right? It just means that it's a single maybe not. It's a company that it's chugging along, but it isn't anything that's going to create a great exit for anybody. But it's a business, right? And that's a lot of businesses in America, right?
Yeah.
So.
So that is like, I think it's also that like that the steepness of that between the first and the second round is so deep, because it's also, you've gone through it's really that part where you go from build an idea, someone validating your idea, to now actually having to prove that validation before you can go in.
Yes. Yeah, and when really it's customers proving the idea and people paying you money, because if people pay you money, people want it. And a lot of business is as much about business model innovation as it is about engineering innovation, right? Like, your business model has to make sense, because you could build the greatest product in the world, but if people either can't afford it, or people don't understand how they're supposed to pay for it, or it just doesn't make sense how much you're charging, then it doesn't matter how good that product is. And I always like to say, I'd rather be a mediocre product that had great marketing than a great product that had mediocre marketing, because and at the end of the game, it's not about who builds the best product, it's about who yells the loudest. Right? It's about who hears you when you yell, right? Because I've seen lots of great, incredible products, perfectionist design. It never makes the market because it's perfectionist, or it makes the market, but they did a lousy job of marketing it. Like, nobody knew, and that's also a problem with a lot of businesses, right?
And no, it's. So, what would be like, in all the businesses you've built, what would be like things that are like someone who's building a company for the first time, as a first-time founder? What would be things that you think are like the most common obstacles, but still really hard obstacles to cross?
I mean, all the stuff that people don't want to do are the hard stuff, right? I mean, that's what I find is the hard things. And when we go through, we've been kind of building a venture studio accelerator model. We're oriented at creators, so our thesis is audience capital, because marketing, as I was saying about the yelling, right? And today, marketing is all social media, right? You get your news on social. A lot of people find out their things off socials, and so for us, our premise is that creators are kind of the biggest yellers and barkers out there, but they're not necessarily the greatest business people. So we like to build businesses around them, where we'll iterate, ideate, and build something around them. Our pitch is also very simple, because I have a lot of like video creators and musicians, and I kind of tell them, I'm going like, well, a media mogul or a music mogul is a 3x business, right? A tech mogul is a 10 to 100x business. You want to be a tech mogul, but you have media and music, use that as your messenger, but be a tech mogul, and I'll help you be a tech mogul. I build like app businesses and subscription, all the ARRs and MRRs and SaaS, all the things that investors like to list here, right? And I built that around creators, and that's what we've been building, right? We have a studio in Santa Monica where we've incubated now about 10 or 12 different creator-oriented businesses that are built around, and these creators are, TikTokers, social influencers, some of them are TV celebrities, athletes, right? But they all have audiences, and then it's trying to find the right thing to fit their audience, right?
So, in all these, like you build businesses in rather like in different areas. Like when you go from 0 to 1, like right now building out a new concept, compared to 1 to N, how different is that?
0 to 1 is probably, it's both the most exciting and the scariest time of a startup, because first of all, you don't know if people will love what you do. Obviously, when you're building it, you're having so much fun building. It's like a baby, right? But just like a baby, when it comes out of the womb, it doesn't know anything, and the environment, the peers, the siblings, the parents, everything, its environment and its ecosystem will affect the way that that baby forms and builds into, you know, a child and eventually an adult, right? And those things are formed, right, when it's built from the womb and when it grows up. And I think a startup is the same thing. It's like, and the 0 to 1 would formatively be probably what I would equate to 0 to kindergarten, right? That's when most people learn language, right? Languages are learned on the first 5 years of a baby's life or a kid's life, right? You learn languages the fastest because you basically have a blank slate. And once you get past 5, you have built-in biases. And those biases affect the way you learn, right? You also have peer and sibling and other types of references. And those form how you deal with conflict management, how you learn things, how you react to things, your sense of compromise, conflict management. All those things are formed in those first 5 years. I think in the startup business, it's very similar. And so those are the things that, and that's why accelerators, mentorship, all those things work, because those are your parents, those are your peers, those are the things that equivalent to how you're growing up from a kid, as a kid. Those are the things that influence how your business is going to form and how you build it.
I love that. Before we wrap up, any advice for founders building their companies but still early stage, figuring out what to do next, and for students who are still getting into the state of being a founder?
I mean, first of all, passion is still the king, right? I think that you need to follow your passion, and at the same time, you do need validators every step of the way to validate, is this really going to work? And that, you know, so it's fleshing out the idea. It's not thinking that your idea is the best thing since sliced bread. It's thinking, I can still build a better toaster, right? And I need to tweak it, right? Because I want that perfect brown bread, right? And to do that, I need to trial and error, and I need to try out that, you know, try out breads, you know, try out, you know, timing, try out settings, all those things. It's the same thing with a startup, is that you have to test and try, and then you need to get other peers and friends to give you honest feedback, and I mean honest feedback, right? So, and you need to throw it out in the wild and test it and iterate, and just as long as you don't believe that inevitably what you build is the best thing, and you always have that room for improvement. I think that's the key, because it's never going to be perfect, right? Even companies that are public and do things, they can always change, and things change with them. I mean, a perfect example of this is Peloton, right? Zoom is another perfect example. Yeah. Look at these two companies, right? They were Zoom, you know, video conferencing was kind of this kind of a business. It was good. It was kind of growing. Zoom the guy, Eric Yuan, came out of WebEx, which was the predecessor to that. And he just figured, WebEx was a little clunky, was built on Java. Zoom was built for the browser era, a little cleaner, right? And he iterated, made it easier. It's still kind of hard. It's not the best, right? But it's better than what came before it, right? And it's evolved. But the pandemic took it to the next level, right? Of course, now that there's no pandemic, it's also gone down. And so you have to iterate, but now they have AI, so it's changing with the times, right? Peloton is another one. It was a good business. Peloton the pandemic made it a great business because people were stuck at home, right? But now that people are not stuck at home, they realize, and the economy is the way it is with inflation and everything, like people realize, oh geez, paying $39 a month is a little expensive when I'm not stuck at home using it. I want to get out, I want to go, you know. And so you have to change with the times and adjust, and that's something that happens 0 to 1, 1 to n, and everywhere in between. You just have to be prepared to pivot,
evolve,
and evolve. Yeah,
I love that. Thank you so much for taking out time. This was an honor.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, Kunal.